Everything you learned in school about history? Yeah, most of it is complete nonsense. And I'm going to prove it to you right now. Look, I get it. You trust your teachers. You trust those history books with the fancy covers and the old-looking pages. But here's the thing. Some of the most famous facts that everyone knows are actually total lies that somehow became truth, because people just kept repeating them over and over again. I'm talking about myths so big, so widespread, that even your grandparents believe them. Even history teachers believe them. And today, we're going to break down the absolute worst ones, ranked from bad to absolutely catastrophic. By the end of this video, you're going to question everything you thought you knew about the past. Now, before we dive in, I need to set something straight. These aren't just little mistakes or misunderstandings. These are massive lies that have shaped how billions of people see entire time periods, cultures, and historical figures. We're talking about myths that have been in movies, textbooks, documentaries, everywhere, and nobody seems to care about correcting them. So let's get into it. Here are the worst historical myths, ranked. Number 10. Vikings wore horned helmets. Okay, starting off with a classic one that pretty much everyone gets wrong. Close your eyes and picture a Viking. What do you see? A big bearded warrior with a horned helmet, right? Maybe he's holding an axe, standing on a boat, looking all intimidating. Yeah, that never happened. Vikings never wore horned helmets. Not a single piece of archaeological evidence supports this. 0 Viking helmets with horns have ever been found. None. So where did this come from? It goes back to the 1800s. There was this costume designer for an opera. Yeah, an opera about Vikings, and he thought it would look cool to add horns to the helmets. That's it. That's the whole story. Some guy designing costumes for entertainment decided to make the Vikings look more dramatic, and now everyone thinks that's how they actually dressed. The real Viking helmets were simple, practical, and actually useful in combat. Horns would have been incredibly stupid in a fight. Imagine trying to battle someone and your enemy's sword gets caught in your horn and snaps your neck. Not exactly warrior material. But this myth has been in every movie, every cartoon, every Halloween costume. It's everywhere, and it completely misrepresents Norse culture. Number 9. Napoleon was really short. Here's another one that people love to repeat. Napoleon Bonaparte was supposedly this tiny little man with a massive ego who tried to conquer Europe to compensate for his height. The Napoleon complex is named after him. Short guy, big attitude, right? Wrong. Napoleon was about 5'6" or 5'7", which was actually average height for Frenchmen at that time. He wasn't short at all by the standards of his era. So why does everyone think he was tiny? 2 main reasons. First, British propaganda during the Napoleonic Wars made fun of him by drawing him as a small, angry man. The British hated Napoleon because he kept beating them in battles, so they made cartoons showing him as this little raging figure. It was basically just them being salty about losing. Second, there was confusion about French measurement units versus British ones. In French measurements, he was listed as 5'2", but those were French feet, which were longer than British feet. When the British saw 5'2", they assumed he was short, but he was actually normal height. This myth has lasted for over 200 years. People still use Napoleon complex as a real psychological term, all based on a lie created by British political cartoons. Number 8. People in the Middle Ages thought the earth was flat. This one drives me crazy because it's taught in schools like it's fact. The story goes that everyone in medieval Europe was ignorant and stupid, thinking the earth was flat, until brave Christopher Columbus came along and proved them all wrong by sailing west to find India. Here's the reality. Educated people have known the earth was round since ancient Greece. We're talking over 2,000 years ago. Greek philosophers and mathematicians had already figured it out and even calculated the Earth's circumference pretty accurately. During the Middle Ages, scholars, sailors, and educated people all knew the Earth was round. It wasn't even a debate. Medieval universities taught that the Earth was a sphere. There are countless medieval texts, maps, and artworks that clearly show the Earth as round. So where did this myth come from? Mostly from the 1800s, when some writers wanted to make the past look more primitive than it actually was. They created this narrative that medieval people were all ignorant peasants who thought you'd fall off the edge of the world if you sailed too far. Columbus wasn't trying to prove the Earth was round. Everyone already knew that. He was trying to find a western route to Asia because he thought the Earth was much smaller than it actually is. Spoiler alert, he was wrong and he accidentally ran into the Americas instead. Number 7. Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake." This is probably one of the most famous quotes that was never actually said. The story goes that during a bread shortage in France when poor people were starving, Marie Antoinette callously said, "Let them eat cake," showing how out of touch she was with the suffering of common people. It's a perfect villain moment, the rich, spoiled queen mocking the poor, except she never said it. This quote appears in Jean-Jacques Rousseau's autobiography, written when Marie Antoinette was just a child. He attributed it to a great princess, but didn't name her. Later, during the French Revolution, propagandists attached the quote to Marie Antoinette to make her look bad. And it worked. Even today, this quote is used to symbolize elite ignorance and cruelty. But Marie Antoinette never said those words. By most historical accounts, she was actually pretty charitable and concerned about poverty. She wasn't perfect, but she definitely didn't say this. The phrase has become more famous than the actual person. That's how powerful a good myth can be. It completely replaces reality. Number 6. The Great Wall of China is visible from space. This myth is repeated everywhere. It's in textbooks, documentaries, random trivia facts, everywhere. People say the Great Wall of China is the only man-made structure visible from space with the naked eye. Astronauts have repeatedly said this is false. You cannot see the Great Wall from space with your naked eye. From low Earth orbit, you can see cities, highways, airports, and other large structures way more easily than you can see the Great Wall. And from the moon? You can't see any man-made structures at all. The Great Wall is wide enough to walk on, but from space it's way too narrow to distinguish from the natural landscape. It's basically the same color as the dirt around it, so it blends in. This myth probably started because the wall is so long, over 13,000 miles if you count all the different sections and branches. People assumed something that long must be visible from far away. But length doesn't matter as much as contrast and width when you're looking from orbit. Even Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei confirmed he couldn't see it from space. So why does this myth persist? Probably because it sounds impressive and people like the idea that this ancient structure is so massive it can be seen from space. Number 5. Humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time. Okay, this one is scary because a surprising number of people actually believe this. According to surveys, somewhere around 20 to 30% of Americans think humans and dinosaurs existed at the same time. Let me be crystal clear. Dinosaurs went extinct about 65 million years ago. Modern humans have only existed for about 300,000 years. That's a gap of over 64 million years. It's not even close. So why do people believe this? Mostly because of movies like Jurassic Park, cartoons like the Flintstones, and certain religious interpretations that claim the Earth is only a few thousand years old. Pop culture has completely blurred the timeline in people's minds. This isn't just a harmless mistake. It represents a fundamental misunderstanding of evolution, geology, and basically all of science. When people think humans rode dinosaurs or hunted them, it shows how easily entertainment can override education. The gap between the last dinosaurs and the first humans is larger than the gap between the first dinosaurs and when dinosaurs went extinct. Think about that. Dinosaurs existed for so long that there's more time between different dinosaur species than between the last dinosaurs and us. Number 4. Christopher Columbus discovered America. We're getting into the really damaging myths now. This one has shaped how millions of people understand history, and it's wrong on multiple levels. First, you can't discover a place where millions of people already live. When Columbus arrived in 1492, there were thriving civilizations throughout the Americas. Complex societies, massive cities, sophisticated agriculture, art, science, all of it was already there. You can't discover a place that's already inhabited. Second, Columbus never even reached mainland North America. He landed in the Caribbean islands. He explored parts of Central and South America on later voyages, but he never set foot in what's now the United States. Third, Columbus wasn't even the first European to reach the Americas. Viking explorer Leif Erikson landed in North America around the year 1000, about 500 years before Columbus. There's archaeological evidence of Norse settlements in Newfoundland. So why is Columbus so famous? Because European colonizers needed a hero figure to justify colonization. They turned Columbus into this brave explorer who brought civilization to a new world, ignoring the fact that he launched centuries of genocide, slavery, and cultural destruction. Columbus himself was not a good person by any measure. He enslaved and brutalized indigenous people. He was actually arrested and brought back to Spain in chains at one point, because his governorship was so cruel that even other colonizers thought he went too far. But we still have Columbus Day. Schools still teach kids to celebrate him. The myth has become so embedded in culture that pointing out the truth makes some people angry. Number 3. Ancient Romans vomited. during feasts so they could eat more. You've probably heard this one. Rich Romans would have these massive feasts, and when they got too full, they'd go to a special room called a vomitorium to throw up, then come back and eat more. It sounds disgusting and excessive, which is probably why people love telling this story. But it's not true. Vomitoriums were not rooms for vomiting. They were passageways in stadiums and theaters where crowds would exit. The word comes from the Latin vomitare, which means to spew forth, like how crowds spew forth from a building. It's about architecture, not eating. Did some Romans occasionally overeat and throw up at parties? Maybe, sure. But it wasn't this systematic thing where they designed special rooms for it. That's completely made up. This myth probably stuck around because it fits into this narrative about Roman decadence and excess. People love stories about ancient civilizations being wild and crazy, so they don't question whether it's actually true. Number 2. Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock. American history is full of myths, but this one is particularly silly. Every American kid learns that the Pilgrims landed on Plymouth Rock in 1620, stepping off the Mayflower onto this symbolic rock that represents the beginning of America. Here's the problem. There's zero evidence that the Pilgrims ever interacted with Plymouth Rock at all. The rock wasn't mentioned in any of the Pilgrims' writings or accounts. Nobody talked about it for over 100 years after they arrived. The first mention of Plymouth Rock comes from 1741, when a 95-year-old man claimed his father had told him that the Pilgrims landed there. That's it. That's the entire historical basis for this story, one very old guy's childhood memory of what his dead father supposedly said. But Americans needed a physical symbol for the founding of the colonies, so Plymouth Rock became that symbol. It's been moved, broken, repaired, and turned into a tourist attraction. There's a whole monument built around it. The real Pilgrims probably just waded ashore through the water wherever it was convenient. They were tired, seasick, and trying to survive. Nobody was thinking about creating symbolic moments for future tourists. Number 1. The Dark Ages were a period of ignorance and barbarism. And here we are at the absolute worst historical myth. The idea that after Rome fell, Europe entered this dark period where nothing happened, nobody learned anything, and everyone was just living like ignorant barbarians until the Renaissance came and saved everyone. This myth is so wrong it's hard to know where to start. First, the Roman Empire didn't even completely fall in the 5th century. The Eastern Roman Empire, also called the Byzantine Empire, continued for another 1,000 years. Constantinople was the largest, wealthiest, most advanced city in Europe throughout the entire medieval period. Second, medieval Europe had universities, hospitals, architectural innovations, agricultural advances, and massive construction projects. They built cathedrals that still stand today and are considered engineering marvels. They developed water wheels, windmills, and mechanical clocks. They created systems of law that influenced modern legal codes. Third, while Europe was developing, the Islamic Golden Age was happening. Scholars in the Middle East and North Africa were making huge advances in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. They preserved ancient Greek texts that would have been lost otherwise. They invented algebra, created detailed star charts, and performed complex surgeries. China during this period had gunpowder, printing, paper money, and compasses. The Americas had the Maya, who had advanced mathematics and astronomy. They had a calendar system that was more accurate than the European one. So where did this Dark Ages myth come from? Renaissance scholars in the 1300s and 1400s wanted to make themselves look more impressive. So they talked about how they were bringing back the glory of ancient Rome after centuries of darkness. They basically invented the concept of the Dark Ages to make their own era seem more special. Then Enlightenment thinkers in the 1700s pushed this narrative even further. They painted the Middle Ages as a time of superstition and religious oppression to contrast with their own Age of Reason. This myth has had massive consequences. It's made people view 1,000 years of human history as worthless. It's created this false idea that history moves in a straight line from primitive to advanced. It's caused people to dismiss entire civilizations and cultures as backward. Even the term Dark Ages is biased. It's called dark because we supposedly don't know much about it. But that's only true if you ignore Byzantine, Islamic, Chinese, African, and indigenous American sources. We actually know a lot about this period. This is the worst historical myth because it's the most comprehensive. It doesn't just misrepresent one person or one event. It erases entire centuries of human achievement across multiple continents. So what now? Here's what's really disturbing about all of these myths. They don't just exist in old dusty books that nobody reads. They're actively taught in schools. They're in movies and TV shows. They're repeated by teachers, parents, and historians who should know better. These myths shape how we see the world. When you believe Columbus discovered America, you're accepting a colonial narrative that erases indigenous people. When you believe the Dark Ages were dark, you're accepting a view of history that dismisses most of the world. When you believe Napoleon was short, you're accepting British propaganda from 200 years ago. History isn't just about memorizing dates and names. It's about understanding how we got here and what actually happened. And when the stories we're told are lies, we end up with a completely distorted view of reality. The scary part is that if these myths can become accepted fact, what else are we wrong about? What other historical truths are just myths that nobody has bothered to question? That's the real problem with historical myths. They don't just make us wrong about the past, they make us doubt everything we think we know. And maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe we should be questioning everything we were taught. Because if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that the winners write the history books and the winners aren't always telling the truth. So the next time someone tells you a historical fact that sounds a little too perfect or a little too much like a movie plot, question it, look it up, find multiple sources, because chances are there's a lot more to the story than what you've been told. History is messy, complicated, and full of people who were just as confused about their own time as we are about ours. It's not a series of neat stories with clear heroes and villains. It's chaos, and we're all just trying to make sense of it. And that's way more interesting than any myth. If you want to see more videos about history myths, hit subscribe.